Get ready, because today is not simply another date passing across the calendar. It is a moment that can reach into a part of you that you have spent years keeping protected. There is a place inside you that you may rarely acknowledge, a private, emotional room surrounded by defenses you built so carefully that you eventually forgot when those walls first appeared. Yet today, something shifts. For once, approaching that hidden place does not have to mean reopening the wound or reliving the pain that created it. On August 23rd, the Sun forms an exact trine with Chiron, the wounded healer, and the deeper meaning of this alignment is something many people will completely overlook. They may move through their Saturday and Sunday as though these are ordinary days, never realizing that the universe is creating an unusually gentle opportunity to heal without first forcing you through another painful collapse. And if you are a Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn, pay especially close attention, because this transit does not speak to every sign with the same intensity. It reaches toward these three earth signs in a particularly personal way, and what it is preparing to restore may be something you have felt separated from for a very long time. Before we reveal exactly what that means, however, you need to understand the larger energetic landscape surrounding this moment, because today is arriving in the middle of something much bigger than a single planetary aspect. We are currently positioned between two eclipses, with the total solar eclipse that moved through Leo on August 12th already behind us, while the partial lunar eclipse in Pisces approaches on August 28th. In other words, you are presently moving through an eclipse corridor, and most people have very little understanding of how intensely such a period can affect the human nervous system. If your body has recently felt unusually heavy, if tension has appeared without an obvious explanation, if you have noticed physical discomfort that seems to have no clear physical origin, or if a strange pressure has suddenly settled into your throat or chest, do not dismiss those experiences too quickly. There is a very specific reason this period can feel different, and we will come back to that. But first, you need to see the complete picture. The eclipse corridor has not reached its conclusion. It is still developing, and this is precisely where many people misunderstand what an eclipse actually does. It is easy to assume that the total solar eclipse on August 12th was the main event, that it arrived, created disruption, and then disappeared so life could return to normal. But eclipses do not operate as isolated moments. They establish a corridor, a concentrated passage of accelerated energy extending from one eclipse toward the next. And right now, you are standing inside that passage. The solar eclipse in Leo may have already removed something from your life, perhaps an identity that was never truly yours, perhaps a relationship that had stopped fitting who you were becoming, or perhaps an older version of yourself that you continued performing for so long that you no longer recognized the performance. That eclipse demanded release. Maybe you surrendered willingly, or perhaps circumstances forced something out of your hands before you were ready to let it go. Either way, the aftermath can create a strange emotional contradiction. You may feel lighter in certain places, while becoming intensely sensitive in others, almost as though a protective layer has been removed, and parts of you that remained shielded for years are suddenly exposed to the air. That rawness can be frightening, because the mind often interprets vulnerability as evidence that something has gone wrong. But within this particular sequence, that sensitivity represents preparation. The clearing came first because something had to be moved out of the way before healing could reach the deeper layer underneath it. The universe did not strip away those defenses without purpose. It created space for the next alignment to reach precisely where it needs to work. That is why the Sun and Chiron meeting through a trine on August 23rd carries such a different quality. Think of the previous eclipse as opening an area that had remained sealed for too long, while this alignment arrives not to cut deeper, but to begin restoring what has been exposed. The image is almost like a surgical procedure performed while the wound is still open, except this time the process is not about removing something painful, it is about repair. And the reason this alignment deserves your attention becomes even clearer when you examine exactly what is happening in the sky. The Sun entered Virgo on August 22nd, and only a short time later, barely 24 hours afterward, it reaches an exact 120-degree trine with Chiron, positioned at the very beginning of Taurus. Both bodies are placed at 0 degrees and 41 minutes of their respective signs. This is not a loose approximation or a general influence that could be interpreted whenever convenient. The aspect is exact down to the minute of arc, creating an unusually precise connection between the Sun and Chiron. There is another layer that makes this especially significant. Virgo and Taurus are both earth signs, and the trine represents the most harmonious geometric relationship used in astrology. Instead of forcing movement through resistance, this pattern allows energy to flow with far less friction, creating the conditions for something that has been hurting beneath the surface to finally move toward restoration. And as we move forward, that earth-based harmony becomes the key to understanding why this moment may reach you in a way you did not expect. Do not underestimate what a 120-degree angle can activate when the energy behind it is allowed to move without resistance. A trine is associated with natural flow, ease, and an ability to express energy without constantly fighting against obstacles. But when that trine connects two points belonging to the same element, the effect becomes even more concentrated. It is almost like placing two tuning forks beside one another and hearing them begin to vibrate at the same frequency. That is the quality of this connection. Here, the element involved is Earth, and Earth is not concerned with vague ideas or distant theories. It represents the physical body, the tangible world, the sensations you can actually experience, the things you can touch, carry, hold, and feel. That makes this transit intensely grounded. Its symbolism reaches toward your nervous system, your muscles, your breathing, and the physical places where old suffering may have left an imprint. The story is not primarily taking place inside your thoughts. It is not simply about changing what you believe or convincing yourself to think differently. It is about what your body has remembered, even when your conscious mind tried to move forward. This is where Chiron becomes essential. Chiron represents the wound that refuses to disappear completely, the painful area you may have studied, discussed, analyzed, questioned, and tried to understand from every possible angle, only to discover that understanding it intellectually does not automatically make it disappear. There are wounds that the mind can describe perfectly, while the body continues reacting as though the original danger is still present. That is why this Earth trine carries such a distinct healing potential. The movement toward restoration is meeting the wound in the same physical territory where that wound has been held. And this may help explain something you have already been noticing in yourself. Remember those unusual sensations we mentioned earlier, the heaviness, pressure, tension, or strange physical discomfort that seemed difficult to explain. This is where that part of the story begins to make sense. Since the solar eclipse on August 12th, the physical body has been moving through a period of recalibration. The eclipse corridor is not limited to emotional experiences or visible changes in your external circumstances. Within the spiritual framework of this reading, it also reaches toward the autonomic nervous system, the part of your functioning that operates beneath conscious thought and continually evaluates whether your surroundings feel safe or threatening before your rational mind has finished deciding how to respond. When that internal system is adjusting, the body can express what the conscious mind has not yet fully processed. You may notice constriction around the throat pressure through the chest, a jaw that remains clenched without you realizing, its shoulders that gradually rise toward your ears, digestive disturbances that seem to arrive without an obvious explanation, or a strange exhaustion that remains even after you have slept. These sensations can feel random when you experience them individually, but within the symbolic language of this astrological moment, they represent something much deeper. They can be understood as the body bringing an old survival response closer to the surface. Imagine carrying an invisible weight for so long that you eventually stop noticing that you are carrying it. Years can pass, even decades, and the body can continue holding an unresolved response because there was once an experience so overwhelming that you could not completely process it when it happened. Instead of disappearing, the response became contained, buried, and protected beneath layers of adaptation. Now, the pressure of the eclipse corridor may be bringing some of that stored response into awareness. This is why the approaching Sun-Chiron Trine matters so much within this interpretation. Its purpose is not to overwhelm you with another dramatic confrontation. It is not asking you to force open every painful memory or create another crisis in order to prove that you are healing. The symbolism is much gentler and much more grounded. The Sun in Virgo brings awareness toward the physical body, while Chiron in Taurus represents a wound held within that same physical realm. Through their harmonious trine, these 2 points create a symbolic pathway through which what has remained trapped can begin moving toward release with greater naturalness and less resistance. The important distinction is that this is not about reopening trauma simply for the sake of reliving it. It is about resolution. It is about allowing something that has remained locked inside the body to finally have somewhere to go. If your body has already been giving you unusual signals, then within the story of this transit, those sensations may be understood as signs that the preparation has already begun. And now the message becomes far more personal, because although everyone may experience some level of the healing symbolism surrounding this alignment, 3 zodiac signs are positioned directly within its strongest territory. For these signs, the theme is not merely comfort after difficulty or temporary relief from emotional pressure. The deeper theme is power returning. It is the recovery of an inner authority that may have been surrendered so gradually that you eventually forgot what it felt like to possess it. Perhaps you learned to doubt yourself. Perhaps you became accustomed to shrinking your needs. Perhaps you stopped expecting life to respond to you in the way you once believed it could. When something has been absent for long enough, you can begin confusing its absence with your identity. You stop thinking, "I lost my power," and start thinking, "I was never powerful in the first place." That is the shift this moment asks you to recognize. If your Sun, Moon, Ascendant, or chart ruler falls in Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn, listen closely to what follows, because the next part is directed specifically toward your experience. And we begin with Taurus, where the central wound is connected to worth, value, and the deep question of whether you truly believe you deserve what you desire. Taurus. This is where the message becomes intensely personal, because Chiron is moving through your sign, placing the symbolism of its wound directly against the core of your identity. This is not something happening somewhere distant from you or operating quietly at the edges of your life. The theme is touching the very place where you answer the question of who you are. For Taurus, the wound associated with Chiron centers on one of humanity's oldest fears, the fear that you are somehow not enough, not valuable enough, not deserving enough, not worthy of security, comfort, affection, or abundance, simply because you exist as yourself. This kind of wound rarely appears without a history behind it. For many of you, its roots can reach back into childhood, especially through early experiences involving deprivation, instability, or the painful impression that your needs created a burden for the people who were supposed to meet them. Sometimes that lack is obvious. It can involve financial insecurity, physical deprivation, insufficient affection, limited warmth, or an absence of nourishment. But there is another form that can be much harder to identify because everything may have appeared normal from the outside, while something essential remained missing underneath. You learned to adapt around that absence. You learned not to expect too much. You learned to become self-sufficient before you were ever supposed to have to be. And eventually, the protection became part of your personality. You may have become the person who rarely asks anyone for assistance, the person who keeps extra resources available because some part of you is always preparing for the possibility that security could disappear again. You may have connected your value to what you produce, what you own, what you accomplish, or how much you can provide for everyone around you. Or perhaps your response went in the opposite direction. Maybe you began rejecting material desires altogether because wanting comfort, money, possessions, or stability felt somehow dangerous, selfish, or weak. Either way, the original wound created a strategy for survival. Today, the Sun in your fifth house of joy, creativity, and authentic self-expression forms an exact trine with Chiron in your first house. And this is where the deeper shift begins. The fifth house asks you to remember what it feels like to create, enjoy, play, express yourself, and exist without constantly measuring whether you are useful enough to deserve your place in the world. The first house represents your identity and the way you inhabit your physical existence. When these two areas connect through this exact trine, the symbolism creates an opportunity to recognize the old wound without automatically activating the defenses you constructed around it. You may be able to look directly at the pattern without becoming consumed by it. You may feel the old fear without allowing that fear to dictate your choices. You may finally recognize that the strategies you built to protect yourself were once necessary responses, but they do not have to remain permanent conditions for your life. And what begins returning is not simply confidence. It is something deeper, the unwavering recognition that your value is not dependent on performance. You do not have to earn your right to feel safe. You do not have to prove that you deserve love. You do not have to accumulate enough, accomplish enough, endure enough, or provide enough before you are allowed to believe that you matter. Your worth exists before the achievement. It exists before the possession. It exists before anyone applauds what you have done. When that understanding moves beyond an intellectual idea and becomes something your body can actually experience, the fortress you spent years constructing begins to lose its purpose. You no longer need every wall simply because the original threat is no longer controlling your identity. You stop organizing your entire life around protection and begin making room for participation. You begin living rather than constantly preparing yourself for the possibility of losing what you have. And that transformation can make the Taurus energy that emerges from this healing deeply compelling, grounded, generous, and naturally magnetic. Because there is a particular kind of generosity that becomes possible only after a person no longer believes they must hoard love, security, resources, or worth in order to survive. Now the focus moves to Virgo, where the wound takes an entirely different form. And for you, the battle has been happening inside the mind for far longer than most people realize. Virgo. The Sun is now moving through your sign, placing you directly inside your own season. Normally, this period can bring a stronger sense of identity, sharper concentration, renewed motivation, and the feeling that you are gradually returning to yourself. But this year, the symbolism goes deeper than simple renewal, because the Sun is not merely illuminating who you are becoming. It is also exposing the hidden standard against which you have been judging yourself for years. The Virgo wound is relentless perfectionism, the internal demand that always seems to discover one more thing that needs correction before you can finally feel satisfied. It is the voice that replays conversations afterward, searching for the sentence you should have phrased differently. It is the inner evaluator that examines every project, relationship, decision, and responsibility for the flaw that might have escaped your attention. You may receive countless compliments and still find that one criticism follows you home, repeating in your mind long after every positive comment has faded. What makes this especially difficult is that the people around you may have absolutely no idea how exhausting this internal process has become. From the outside, you appear capable, you are dependable, you are organized. You are often the person others trust when something needs to be handled correctly. You can look completely composed while internally running an exhausting system of constant evaluation. Somewhere beneath that competence, there can be a voice insisting that one more improvement will finally make you acceptable. If you work harder, analyze more carefully, serve everyone more completely, anticipate every problem, and eliminate every possible mistake, perhaps then you will finally reach the invisible standard you have been chasing. Today, Chiron in your ninth house of higher meaning and belief systems forms this trine with your Sun, and what emerges from that connection is nothing less than a philosophical breakthrough. The ninth house shapes the framework through which you interpret existence itself, the beliefs, assumptions, principles, and larger meanings you use to understand your life. Chiron's role here is to reveal that the problem may not simply be what you have been looking at. It may be the lens through which you have been looking. The standard you have used to measure yourself may have been distorted from the beginning, and recognizing that distortion becomes the doorway to the next stage of this healing journey. The belief system that taught you perfection was the price of acceptance was never the truth about you. It was something you inherited, something that was placed upon you, something you learned through experience, expectation, and repetition. And because you learned it so early and carried it for so long, it began to feel like an unquestionable fact. But today gives you an opportunity to recognize that this rule was never written into your nature. It can be released. Virgo, the power returning to you, is not the ability to become flawless. It is the freedom to accept yourself while remaining completely human. Your analytical mind does not disappear when this healing begins. It changes direction. The same intelligence that once searched endlessly for what was wrong can begin noticing what is already complete. The same precision that once became a weapon you aimed inward can become one of your greatest instruments for healing. You can still observe details, recognize patterns, improve situations, and notice what others overlook. But you no longer have to turn every observation into evidence against yourself. Imagine waking up and realizing that the mind that spent years trying to find your imperfections was never your enemy. It simply learned to protect you through constant correction. Now, it can finally be taught another purpose. It can identify what is working. It can recognize what is beautiful. It can see where you have already grown. And when a Virgo stops punishing themselves simply for being human, something remarkable happens. Their natural ability to understand, organize, refine, and heal becomes available not only for their own restoration, but for everyone whose life they touch. This is the version of Virgo that does not need to be perfect before offering wisdom. This is the Virgo who understands that compassion does not require the elimination of every flaw. And that transformation begins today. Capricorn, your story moves into a much quieter wound, but do not mistake quietness for weakness. We need to talk about the enormous weight you have learned to carry. And this is not merely about responsibilities, although there may be more responsibilities on your shoulders than most people ever realize. The deeper burden is the belief that you must carry everything alone. Your wound has remained hidden because you became exceptionally skilled at hiding it. Somewhere early in your life, you may have learned that vulnerability could create danger, that needing another person could leave you exposed, and that depending upon yourself was safer than trusting someone else to remain steady. Perhaps circumstances forced you to take on adult responsibilities before you were emotionally prepared for them. Perhaps you watched someone you trusted collapse under pressure, and somewhere deep inside yourself you made a decision that you would never allow that to happen to you. You would become stronger. You would become more prepared. You would become the person who could survive anything. Over time, that decision became a structure around your identity. You built yourself like a tower, stable, disciplined, difficult to shake, difficult to reach, and remarkably independent. The world often rewards you for this. People call you strong. They see leadership. They see discipline. They see reliability. They come toward you when something needs to be carried, solved, organized, or endured. But the world does not always see the price of becoming that person. It does not see the nights when loneliness becomes so heavy that it feels almost physical. It does not see the moments when you desperately want to ask someone to help you, while another voice inside immediately tells you that you cannot. It does not see the slow exhaustion created by constantly holding everything together while quietly feeling yourself weaken underneath the responsibility. Today, the Sun forms a trine to Chiron from your 9th house toward your 5th house, and this connection brings attention to a part of yourself that has been waiting for permission to exist. The 5th house is associated with the inner child, the part of you that was meant to play, create, laugh, explore, and love without calculating every possible consequence. Chiron is positioned there with the memory of the child who had to become mature too soon. This trine creates a symbolic passage between your adult understanding of life and the younger part of you that never received enough permission to simply be young. The Sun in the 9th house expands awareness. It allows you to step farther back from your personal history and observe your own story from a broader perspective. From that higher viewpoint, something becomes visible that may have been impossible to recognize while you were simply surviving. Strength and vulnerability were never true opposites. They only appeared to be opposites because you learned to associate vulnerability with danger. The strongest leaders throughout history were not people who could never be touched. They were people who could feel deeply, remain open to experience, recognize their own humanity, and ask for help without believing that doing so erased their authority. The power returning to you is emotional freedom inside your strength. You do not have to choose between being capable and being human. You are allowed to be both. Once that truth becomes integrated, your leadership begins changing from rigid control into something far more powerful. Your authority can be supported by compassion. Your wisdom can be softened by empathy. Your strength can create safety rather than distance. This is the Capricorn the world truly needs. The Capricorn who no longer has to become emotionally unreachable in order to remain dependable. And it begins with allowing that younger part of you to finally breathe. But the story does not end when the Sun-Chiron Trine reaches exactness at 3:30 in the afternoon on August 23rd. This is only the beginning of the sequence, because what follows creates an effect that continues moving through the days ahead. On August 25th, Mercury, the ruler of Virgo, enters its home sign and immediately forms a trine to Chiron at nearly the same degree. This creates a second stage in the process. The somatic healing associated with the body on August 23rd receives a cognitive layer on August 25th. What your body has been releasing can finally become something your mind knows how to name. Experiences that previously existed only as sensations may begin forming into understanding. Insights can appear unexpectedly. Conversations may suddenly take place that you had been unable to initiate before. Journaling may become easier, with realizations arriving so naturally that it can feel as though the words are organizing themselves. Then, on August 28th, the partial lunar eclipse in Pisces arrives, and this is where the larger process reaches another stage of transformation. If the Sun, Chiron Trine on August 23rd, represents the surgical work, and Mercury on August 25th helps you understand what has been removed or released. Then, the lunar eclipse in Pisces on August 28th represents the washing away of what remains. Pisces carries the symbolism of the ocean. It dissolves boundaries, purifies, and carries what has already been released back toward the greater cosmic source. The sequence becomes a three-part process: release, understanding, dissolution. All three stages unfold within 1 week. The timing creates a remarkably precise progression, as though each event prepares the ground for the next one. The message here is not subtle. The symbolic language of the sky is describing a carefully sequenced healing process, and you are at the center of it. But understand something important, because this changes the entire meaning of what you are experiencing. Today is not about fixing you. You were never fundamentally broken. The wound represented by Chiron is not proof that something is defective inside you. It is an opening. The mythology surrounding Chiron makes this distinction especially powerful. Chiron could not completely heal his own wound, yet that same wound became the source of his greatest wisdom. He taught heroes. He developed mastery in medicine, music, and prophecy. His suffering did not make him worthless. It became part of what made his knowledge irreplaceable. That is the deeper invitation of this transit. You are not being asked to erase every trace of pain from your history. You are being invited to integrate what happened so completely that the wound no longer controls the meaning of your life. There comes a moment when the experience that once caused the deepest pain can become the source of your deepest strength. The wound stops functioning as a weakness and begins functioning as medicine. Today, the geometry of the sky symbolically supports that transition. You are being invited to stop spending all of your energy fighting the existence of the wound and begin understanding what it has taught you. You are being invited to stop running from vulnerability and discover what becomes possible when vulnerability is included in your leadership, your relationships, your creativity, and your identity. The healed expression of your wound is not merely strength in the ordinary sense. It is a form of strength that carries knowledge, because it has survived something real. It is strength that understands compassion, because it has known pain. It is wisdom that does not need to dominate, because it already knows what endurance costs. That is what is being returned to you. Not innocence. Not the impossible promise of becoming the person you were before the pain. Something more mature is being offered instead. A power that remembers what it survived. A power capable of holding compassion in one hand and wisdom in the other. A power that understands suffering without allowing suffering to become its identity. And that is precisely the kind of power the world needs, especially now. Especially from you. Do not allow this window to pass without becoming conscious of it. The Sun-Chiron Trine becomes exact on August 23rd, but its energy is already building before that exact moment arrives. You may notice it through your body first. You may notice unfamiliar physical sensations, old memories returning unexpectedly, or emotions appearing without an obvious external trigger. Within the symbolism of this alignment, these experiences can feel like the transit reaching you before the aspect reaches perfection. So tonight and today, give yourself permission to slow down. Breathe. Notice what your body is communicating. You do not need a complicated ritual. You do not need to discover the perfect affirmation. You do not need to perform healing correctly. You simply need to stop running from what you are feeling long enough to allow yourself to actually feel it. Whatever has been chasing you, allow yourself to turn around and face it. What catches up with you during this period is not necessarily coming to destroy you. Under this particular geometry, the deeper message is transformation. What once frightened you can become the very material through which freedom is created. And when you eventually look back on this week, when you remember the passage between these two eclipses, you may recognize August 23rd as a turning point. The moment when an old wound stopped being the primary definition of who you were and began becoming part of what you could use with wisdom. This is not simply about healing. It is about reclaiming something that was always capable of becoming yours. Thank you for staying with this message and giving it your attention. If this content resonated with you and you would like to continue exploring these spiritual and astrological messages, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means a great deal. You are also welcome to share your experiences and thoughts in the comments, because your personal reflection may help someone else recognize what they're moving through. Take care of yourself, and I will see you again very soon for more insightful content.